Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. New York police and riot gear raided the campuses of Columbia University and the City College of New York Tuesday night, arresting more than 200 student protesters in the latest crackdown on peaceful Palestine solidarity protests on U.S. campuses. Over the past 2 weeks, police in the United States have arrested more than 1,200 protesters on campuses as students set up encampments, calling on schools to divest from Israel. The raid on Columbia came less than 24 hours after students occupied Hamilton Hall. It was 56 years to the day that police stormed the same hall during the historic 1968 protests at Columbia. On Tuesday night, police climbed into the barricaded building using a ladder attached to a police vehicle. During the police raid on the Columbia campus, the police also broke up the Gaza Solidarity encampment, which had inspired similar encampments across the country. Columbia President Manu Shafiq asked the NYPD to, quote, retain a presence on campus through at least May 17th, 2024. That's 2 days after Columbia's graduation. On Tuesday, faculty at Barnard College, which is part of Columbia, overwhelmingly passed a vote of no confidence for President Laura Rosenberry. Meanwhile, in California, pro-Israeli counter-protesters armed with sticks and metal rods attacked a pro-Palestinian encampment on the campus of UCLA shortly after UCLA's chancellor ruled the encampment unlawful. Pro-Israel counter-protesters launched fireworks at the encampment, which they tried to tear down. In Richmond, Virginia, police deployed pepper spray against student protesters at Virginia Commonwealth University. At least 13 arrests were reported. In Louisiana, a police SWAT team raided an encampment at Tulane University earlier this morning, arresting at least 14 students. The raid came hours after the school suspended 5 students in the school's chapter of Students for a Democratic Society. In Missouri, a history professor was hospitalized Saturday after police violently threw him to the pavement. Steve Tamari, who teaches at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, was filming a protest at Washington University on his phone when he was attacked. His wife, Sandra Tamari, who is Palestinian-American, was arrested during the same protest. Meanwhile, at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, student protesters have voluntarily ended their encampment after school officials agreed to hold a vote on divesting from Israel. On Tuesday, the United Nations criticized the police crackdown on student protests. This is Marta Hurtado, spokesperson for the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
We are troubled by a series of heavy-handed steps taken to disperse and dismantle protests across university campuses in the United States of America. Freedom of expression and the right to peaceful assembly are fundamental to society, particularly when there is a sharp disagreement on major issues, as there are in relation to the conflict in the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel.
As negotiations continue over a ceasefire in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to invade the southern city of Rafah with or without a ceasefire deal. In a statement, Netanyahu said, quote, the idea that we'll halt the war before achieving all of its goals is out of the question. Netanyahu's statement came hours before U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel. On Tuesday, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called again for an immediate ceasefire and warned an Israeli invasion of Rafah would be a, quote, absolutely devastating tragedy.
For the sake of the people of Gaza, for the sake of the hostages and their families in Israel, and for the sake of the region and the wider world, I strongly encourage the government of Israel and the Hamas leadership to reach now an agreement. Without that, I fear the war, with all its consequences both in Gaza and across the region, will worsen exponentially.
The International Court of Justice has rejected a request by Nicaragua to order Germany to halt exporting arms to Israel, but the court declined to throw out the case. Nicaragua had accused Germany of violating the Genocide Convention by providing military and financial aid to Israel. In its ruling, the ICJ said, quote, "The court considers it particularly important to remind all states of their international obligations relating to the transfer of arms to parties to an armed conflict in order to avoid the risk that such arms might be used to violate the above-mentioned conventions." An 18-year career diplomat has resigned from the State Department over the Biden administration's Gaza policy. Hala Raret is the third State Department employee to publicly resign, joining Josh Paul and Anel Shilan. Raret criticized the Biden administration's arming of Israel. She told the Washington Post, quote, "We're promoting a generational cycle of revenge that's not making Israelis any safer," she said. Haiti's new ruling on elected transitional council has picked Fritz Belazer to be the country's new prime minister. His appointment surprised many in Haiti. Some members of the transitional council admit they don't even know who he is. Belazer had served as Haiti's sports minister from 2006 to 2011. Meanwhile, leaders of some of Haiti's most powerful armed groups are demanding a greater role in Haiti's transitional government. Over the weekend, Jimmy Charizier, who is known as Barbecue, said, quote, "It's either we are all at the table or the table gets destroyed with all of us," unquote. New York Judge Juan Merchan fined Donald Trump $9,000 on Tuesday for contempt of court for violating a gag order 9 times by publicly attacking witnesses and jurors in his hush-money criminal trial. Judge Merchan warned future violations could result in jail time for the former president. Later on Tuesday, Keith Davidson, the lawyer who represented Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, testified during Trump's criminal trial about his dealings with Trump's attorney Michael Cohen. Prosecutors showed jurors the wire transfer authorization from Cohen, the form that Cohen used to send $130,000 to Davidson on October 27, 2016, to prevent Daniels from going public about her affair with Trump before the 2016 election. In other Trump news, the former president has refused to rule out political violence if he loses the election in November. Trump told Time magazine, quote, "I think we're going to win. And if you don't win, and if we don't win, you know, it depends. It always depends on the fairness of an election," unquote. In the same interview, Trump said he would, quote, "absolutely consider pardoning every person convicted for taking part in the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol." Florida's 6-week abortion ban goes into effect today, blocking access to the procedure before many people even know they're pregnant. Last month, Florida's Supreme Court ruled abortion rights are not constitutionally protected, allowing the near-total ban to be enforced. The measure has exceptions for rape, incest, fatal fetal anomalies, and medical emergencies. Reproductive justice advocates have vowed to keep fighting as Florida's High Court also ruled in favor of a November ballot referendum that, if passed, would enshrine abortion rights in Florida's Constitution. In a historic move, the Biden administration's moving to reclassify marijuana as a lower-risk substance. The Justice Department has recommended marijuana be reclassified to the same category as some prescription medication. For decades, it's been deemed a Category 1 substance, along with drugs like heroin. Rescheduling would ease restrictions on cannabis research and create legal protections for medical marijuana users who face housing and employment restrictions. DEA rescheduling would not result in federal legalization. The process for the drug reclassification could take months to complete. U.S. rowing has announced it's rescinding honors for the late Olympic rowing coach Ted Nash after an independent investigation found compelling evidence of child sexual abuse. The probe was launched after former athlete Jennifer Fox revealed Nash began abusing her when she was 13 years old. In 2018, Jennifer Fox directed the film The Tale, a narrative memoir based in part on Nash's abuse. At the time, she did not mention Nash by name. Fox publicly accused him of abuse last year when she spoke to the New York Times and Democracy Now!
And I don't doubt that Ted did good in his sport, but the reality is this other story of the horror that he inflicted on me and possibly many, many others had never been told. And I think it's very important to bring this other story out to the world now and to show this other part of the man that people put on a pedestal and made into a god. It's a very important act to stand up to power in this way for me and for others.
Go to democracynow.org to see our full interview with Jennifer Fox. And workers around the world are marking May Day today. In Britain, hundreds blockaded the government's Department for Business and Trade to demand a ceasefire in Gaza and a halt of British arms sales to Israel. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.